Welcome, everybody. We are so glad that you are here, and I want to thank you for participating with us in the Emotionally Healthy Woman small group here. So you should have in front of you the book, The Emotionally Healthy Woman, as well as the participants' workbook. And so let me just say at the outset, before we launch into session one, I want to encourage you to read the corresponding chapter in the book before you show up. You'll get a lot more out of it. The first session is Quit Being Afraid of What Other People Think. Before we kind of launch into that, let's just begin with getting a bit of a background. So Geri, why don't you tell them how the Emotionally Healthy Woman was birthed, a bit of your story.
Right. Well, you really have to understand my journey in following Christ to understand how the Emotionally Healthy Woman came about. I became a follower of Christ, a committed follower of Christ when I was in college. And actually it was in college that I also met Pete. We became friends, and then actually it was several years later, after being friends for about 7 years, that we fell madly in love and decided to get married and really looked forward to serving Christ together. And Pete really felt called to plant a church, so we decided, you know what, let's go to language school, learn Spanish. That'll really help and impact our ministry in New York. So off to language school we went. And then we came back about a year later to begin to plant our church in New York City. And it was difficult. We had no people. It was him, myself, and our baby daughter. But over several years, God began to bring people. The church began to grow and get established. But it seemed like we were going 24/7. And it seemed like there were just constant crises. People were very needy. We had a lot of staff turnover. There seemed like there were a lot of conflicts that didn't get resolved. And that was all really difficult. But what was also a little confusing was, though, the church was growing and people were coming to Christ. They were being healed, their lives were being changed. So it was a little confusing to me because on the one hand, really wonderful things were happening. On the other hand, I was tired, I was exhausted, and I would try and tell Pete, you know, this is hard and I don't really like this. And he'd say, just one more year and things are gonna change. But actually 1 year turned into 3 years then turned into 5. And I realized, yeah, we're gaining the whole world here. People are coming and good things are happening, but I am losing my soul. I also remember saying to him, you know, I really feel like a single parent. And life would actually be easier, I think, if we were separated, because then you'd have to take the kids on the weekend. Because, you know, he's over here running the church and trying to build the church and grow the church and loving people. And I'm over here trying to love people and holding down the domestic front and doing my ministry in church, but we really weren't actually doing a very good job of loving one another. And about year 7, I became so tired, and I got to a point where I really didn't care what anybody thought anymore, which is actually why it took me 7 years to even say, I'm not gonna do this nonsense anymore. Because really all along that time, I began to get in touch with the fact that I did feel angry, I did feel sad, I did feel disappointed. I was miserable, but I also didn't want to admit I was miserable because I didn't think good Christians should have these feelings, and especially good Christian spouses, pastor spouses, which I was. And so I just pushed those feelings down and not think about them and just keep going on until I reached a point where I didn't really recognize myself anymore. I really didn't want to go on, and came to him and said, you know what? I no longer want to do this. This church no longer brings me life. It brings me death. I quit. And I'm going to another church. So I did. I started going to another church, which presented problems for him, the pastor. And I began to think about, how did I allow myself to get to this point of being so miserable? And actually, we didn't want to stay this way. We realized this is kind of complex and a problem going to two different churches, just logistically, because of, at this point now we had 4 children. And, who's going to go to what church? So we got some help to help us make some decisions about what we're going to do and how we're going to go forward. But the biggest thing I learned as a result of us getting help from some wiser people than ourselves was that the problems were not out there. Because up until this point, I was blaming him for my unhappiness. I was blaming New York City, tough place to live. I was blaming ministry and all the people in our church, this church is hard, these people are hard. But what I realized during that week with these folks that really spoke into our lives and really helped us was the problems were not out there. The problems were really inside of me. And that it was me that really needed to change. And this was a huge awakening to realize that the problems weren't out there, the problems were inside of me. And this would begin a wonderful journey, a painful journey, but it would be a pain that would lead to life, not death. And it would be a life-giving journey in which we would begin to learn and grow in a way in our spiritual life that we hadn't up until then. And really, we had had the best discipleship there was really available at that time, and yet realized we were missing some really important things in our spirituality and in our lives and in our following Christ. And so anyway, it would be a journey that would lead us to, and lead me to these things that I needed to quit. It wasn't my church I learned I needed to quit. There were a lot of things that Geri Scazzero needed to quit, but it wasn't the church. And that's what will unfold in our time together.
So we call the overall journey emotionally healthy spirituality, because God met us, it was 1996, transformed our personal lives, our marriage,
Yep.
Our family, our parenting, the entire Church of New Life Fellowship. In fact, Geri quitting was the most loving act she ever did for me in my whole life. It was such a gift, and it launched us. So her quitting became a larger dynamic that we explored for the next 16 years, which we finally put together in that book. So there's 8 I quits, you'll notice in the outline here of the workbook. Number 1, quit being afraid of what others think. Number 2, quit lying. Number 3, quit dying to the wrong things. Number 4, quit denying anger, sadness, and fear. Number 5, quit blaming. Number 6, quit overfunctioning. Number 7, quit faulty thinking. And then number 8, finally, quit living someone else's life. So Geri, just I want to share with him why you felt it was so important that we would put this into a DVD and a workbook and make this available on a wider scale.
2 reasons for me. One is it's going to take courage to quit the things that you need to quit in order to follow Christ in a way that I think he's calling us to follow him. It's going to take courage to begin to do something different, because the kind of quitting that I'm talking about in the Emotionally Healthy Woman is not giving up. It's about quitting things that don't belong to God's kingdom and choosing to do something differently. So the first reason, you're going to need a group to support you, to have the courage to do this if you're really serious about following Christ, if you really want to be authentic in your life. But secondly, the reason I think we wanted to put it into a DVD and a curriculum is these are often so overlooked. These truths that you're going to hear about are so overlooked in Christianity. We don't think twice about them. We do them like the air we breathe. Things like lying, blaming, overfunctioning. And yet they're really crucial to each one of us, that if we don't quit these, we can never experience, I think, the life and the love he meant for us to experience. So because they're so common in our culture, and the church has just taken that culture has come right into the church, that we need to really take time to not just read a book, but to flesh them out with each other, and say, hey, yeah, these are not little things. Even though we do them without thinking about it, they're big things that we need to pay attention to in our following of Christ.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's start with the first one, quit being afraid of what others think. Geri, just tell us, what's that about? And why is it first?
As I began to reflect on how I allowed myself to end up in the place where I did, after into that 7th year of planning and establishing our church, and just really being, I think, tested in who I was as a person and as a Christian, I said, why? I was like, why did it take me so long to stop the nonsense? And I realized the reason it took me so long was because I was really afraid of what other people would think of me. In other words, I did not want to rock the boat. If I said, I don't want to do this anymore, I felt like I would look like the bad guy. I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to ruffle feathers. I didn't want to have people mad at me. Because if I quit the church, if I say, I don't want to do this anymore, it's going to present some difficult decisions that have to be made about our church, or whatever. I didn't know where it was going to go. But what really was a lightning bolt to me was, are you telling me, and I'm speaking to myself, that I've been following Christ wholeheartedly as best as I know how to do, and I have sacrificed in many significant ways in my following and in my desire to express my love to him, and my identity is not really in his love, that my identity has really been rooted in what other people think of me? I really got in touch with the reality that I was really only okay if you were okay with me. This was a painful awakening for me, especially in light of knowing how much I had seriously been following Christ. So it was a big admission, but it was an important admission because I really wanted my life and my identity to be authentically rooted in his love. And it was. I mean, a lot of it was, but I was caught. I came up short in realization that it wasn't as much or as deeply as I thought it was. It wasn't in an experiential way. It wasn't in my daily living. In reality, I was more impacted. My life and my daily experience was really more impacted by what other people thought of me, not in his love.
I remember us sitting in the living room, and you were crying.
Yes.
Because you said you felt like you were walking on a tightrope, and you were just so frightened of where this journey might take you.
It really wrings my heart to realize, like, I had had the best discipleship there was in Christianity, and yet here was this very significant gap that there wasn't a love of God enough that surpassed knowledge. There really, that love wasn't in my interior. So I remember, sitting in our living room, and of course now I have this realization that my love is, my identity is really like in what people think of me, not in the love of God in a way that I thought it was. But I said, I am going to test this love. I am going to quit right now being afraid of what other people think, and I'm going to begin to step out and be authentic in my relationships, be me. And for me, that meant I'm going to say no when I really want to say no, because I was saying a lot of yeses. And I would be silent in conversations rather than fear disagreeing with someone and their perception of me change. So through my silence, through my yes and no's, through a myriad of ways, I realized I was more depending on that person's perception of me, to be congruent with what I wanted it to be, even if it wasn't true. So when I began to step out in faith and say, I'm going to really be authentic in every interaction, I realized this is really hard. And the only way I could describe it is it was like stepping out on a tightrope, and I felt like I was going to die. I mean, it felt like I was going to die. That there was nothing underneath that was going to. I'm going to really be honest. You know, I'm really going to say what I think and feel. And I felt like there was no net underneath it. And I said to him, I don't know if I can do this. I feel like I'm going to die. And then God's still small voice came to me. And I remember hearing him say, it was so beautiful. He says, Geri, there's a net underneath you. You're not going to die. There is a net. As you step out, there's a net, and it is the gospel. The gospel is that is about my love, and that I love you. Therefore, you have nothing left to prove. Because see, most of our lives we are living to get the approval or avoid the disapproval of whether it's employers, family, whoever, spouses, church, friends. And he said, you can step out and be yourself because there is nothing left to prove. It is my love that you ultimately need, and you already have it. I don't have to prove my worth and lovability.
So as Geri stepped out and did that, of course I didn't like it, but I eventually learned myself, and I applied it to my own life as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a pastor, and then even with my siblings. So I had to learn. So what we want to do now, I want to send you off to your workbooks and to follow instructions there as your group meets. Now, towards the end of the study, we're going to come back, and this is going to be the format in each of the studies. We're going to come back and do some frequently asked questions, FAQs, because as you're going to see, the implications of each of these truths are very large and wide, and there'll be some questions that will naturally emerge even beyond your workbook. Okay, so blessings.